I'm reading all of Shakespeare's plays, and this is the first video in what I hope will be a series that goes through every single one of them. This is about Henry VI, Part 1, which is one of the first plays that Shakespeare wrote. It's part of what's called a tetralogy, which is like a trilogy, but like with 4 pieces. There are 3 parts to Henry VI, and then also one of the Richard plays is lumped in there as well, either 3 or 2. My goal for this series is for you to get my reaction to each of the plays as I'm either reading them for the first time or rereading them, so that you can better decide which ones sound most interesting to you and read them for yourself. I'll say right off the bat that it really, really helps to have an audio performance of the play to accompany it while you read, but I do highly encourage you to be reading the text along with what's being performed. There are a few reasons for this. Mainly, you get the tone of the actor's delivery of the dialogue when you have audio accompanying what you're reading, and that helps you understand the intensity of what's going on and better helps you get into the action. Henry VI Part 1 isn't necessarily the first play that Shakespeare wrote, but it's one of the first, and so I'm starting with this tetralogy. I'm going to go Henry VI Part 1, 2, 3, and then do Richard III, the 4th piece of the tetralogy. These 4 plays established Shakespeare as a great playwright and really set the tone for the rest of what would be a couple decades long career. These Henry plays are all histories. Henry VI is no different. And something I didn't realize before I got into this is that Henry VI Parts 1, 2, and 3 are covering the War of the Roses, which is the historical series of events that Game of Thrones is loosely based on. In history, there are the houses of Lancaster and York, which are kind of sort of similar to the Lannisters and Starks, so there's a fun fact for you. As I go along in this series, I'm going to do some light reading of scholarship about the plays, just so I can add in a little bit of additional commentary. Something I kept seeing was that a lot of people think that Henry VI Part 1 is one of the most poorly written of Shakespeare's plays, and that it basically is evidence that Shakespeare was collaborating with other dramatists and historians, especially early in his career. I'm not enough of a Shakespeare expert to be able to have a firm stance one way or the other, but even though I was reading that it was one of his more poorly written plays, I was still really entertained and impressed by a lot of the monologues throughout the play. As far as I'm concerned, Shakespeare is Shakespeare, and there aren't any duds, but part of the purpose of me going through all of these plays like this is to see for myself, really go through all of the source material and have actual informed opinions, instead of the opinions that I've had all of my life, which are just based on the 8 or 9 Shakespeare plays that I've actually sat down and read. Okay, so in Henry VI Part 1, Henry VI is very young. His father, Henry V, has died, and his corpse is in the first scene of the play. By the end of the play, Henry VI is set to marry Margaret, which is a marriage that is arranged by the Earl of Suffolk, who is very explicitly the villain of the play. There are some monologues that the Earl of Suffolk delivers to the audience that make it very plain that he's scheming. And so, again, just think of Game of Thrones. Henry VI Part 1 covers the end of a conflict between England and France, and throughout the play, the scenes go back and forth between England and France, and by the end, it's my understanding that the conflict with France is winding down, and we're going to be focusing on the inner turmoil and conflicts within England between some different houses. And this marriage that is set up at the very end of Henry VI Part 1 is sort of the inciting incident for the next play. It's my understanding that in Part 2, all of these conflicts really start to come to a head and a lot of people pick sides. And then Part 3 is the fallout of that conflict that gets set up. Since this is a play about war, there aren't that many women in the story, but those that are in the story are pretty important. I'm pretty sure Joan of Arc is one of the characters. She's not written in as such. It's La Pucelle. And then, of course, there's Margaret, who is the person that young Henry VI is set to marry. There are a few other characters that I really liked. Lord Talbot and his son are definitely up there. They have some really good dialogue towards the end of the play. I think it's at the end of Act 4, but it could be in Act 5. There are 5 acts in the play. It's important to note that since this is the beginning of a longer story, we have what still kind of feels like falling action from Henry V towards the beginning of Henry VI. So the first 2 acts, 1 and 2 of this play, don't have Henry VI in them. He's not introduced until Act 3 of 5. And the whole play is action-packed. There's constant fighting, and it was pretty entertaining for me to read through it, especially with audio in the background, which I did have an audio performance going for most of my read-through. There was music, there's background noise in the recording that I listened to. I'll link to that in the description so that you can find the one that I listened to. I took about a page of notes and made sure to write down some of the quotes that I loved the best. The one at the very end of the play is really solid, and there's a really good little allusion to Paris, Greece, and a Trojan horse, but the last couple of lines really stood out to me in particular. Margaret shall now be queen and rule the king, but I will rule both her, the king, and realm. And that is delivered by the Earl of Suffolk, who again is the villain of the story. So very clearly setting up the conflict to come. Another quote I liked, which is about death, is pretty short. His fame lives in the world, his shame in you. Which is getting at, if you personally know someone, their legacy to you is all of their personal stuff, but the world may see them very differently than you did. I'm really stoked to read all of Shakespeare's plays, and I think you kind of have to be to want to undertake something like this. I hope that a lot of you will follow along with me, but no worries at all if some of this isn't interesting to you. I'm just gonna plow ahead. My hope is that I can finish this in a couple of months. I'll also be releasing a lot of content that you've become accustomed to. This is not going to become a Shakespeare only channel. Thank you for watching through to the end. If you're new here, definitely consider subscribing. And if this is your thing, I definitely need you to leave a like and be sure to comment on the video, because I don't expect this series to really pop off, but I really want to be making these videos as I go along because I enjoy it and hope that at least some of you do as well. Happy reading, and I'll see you in the next one.